Everybody, this is Collin Moshman, and I'm doing a stocks poker video. Apparently I'm using PowerPoint, which kind of surprises me because I'm not really a very big PowerPoint person. Maybe I have too many bad memories from boring lectures, so I'm going to try to keep this pretty quick. This is on the Negreanu strategy. It's a really basic and pretty cool style for playing heads up. The reason I'm going to call it the Negreanu strategy is because Daniel outlines a similar cash strategy, and he talks about it a little bit in the blog and doesn't give much motivation for it. But I think it's really cool, and we're going to talk about what it is and how to play it in heads up. So the really interesting thing about this is that you play kind of an algorithm. And it's just, what I mean is it's really straightforward, and up until a point in the hand, your bets, raises, all of your decisions are going to be very straightforward. So, how to play Negreanu, Part 1. Min raise every hand before the flop. This does not matter whether you have the button, whether you're in the big blind, you click the raise button throughout the minimum possible raise. After the flop hits, you're going to click the bet button. Whether you're in position or out of position, you simply click bet. And that doesn't matter if you're at the river and it's a decent sized pot, you just click bet. And the only time you're going to actually use your cards to decide on an action is if your opponent, who I call villain, bets or raises before you. So for instance, if you min raise before the flop and he 3-bets you, then you would go and you could do whatever you wanted based on your cards. Or if he check raises you with the flop, which is quite possible, then you have to decide what to do based on your cards, the board, his action, etc. Okay, so now that we have how to play this, let's look a little bit at the advantages of the style. First, it is very aggressive. You're always betting, you're always raising, and it's basically the most aggressive style to play because every hand without exception, you're the one betting and you come in for a raise before the flop regardless of your holding. So it's extremely aggressive. Number 2, it's deceptive. No matter what hand you have, whether you start off with pocket aces, deuce 5 offsuit, whether you connect with the flop or not, you're going to do the same actions. So he can certainly go ahead and raise you and do whatever he wants, but he's not going to know anything about your hand. And lastly, it's easy to play, because some hands are going to require literally no analysis whatsoever. Now that's not necessarily a good thing if you're a very skilled post-flop player and heads up is one of your fortes. But if you're kind of new to heads up maybe, or you just want to figure out a good way to incorporate aggression, then a pretty simple thing to do is start by playing the Negreanu strategy and build up to more conventional loose aggressive strategies based on what you learn from this and just kind of figuring out what happens when you're in there betting and raising a lot. What about the disadvantages? Well, you guys may have thought of a couple. First, it's very inflexible. So for instance, if you flop top pair with a 7, maybe the board comes 3, 5, 7, and there are a couple of diamonds, you want to throw out a big bet to protect a very vulnerable top pair. Okay, most turn cards are going to devalue your hand. You can't do that. You're just betting the minimum. If you want to do something more advanced, like even just check raise, you can't do that. So it really limits your options. That's one disadvantage. And the second, of course, is that you tend to be betting way too small relative to the pot. So for instance, if the blinds are 10-20, you min raise to 40, he calls, you've got a pot of 80, now you're betting 20 into an $80 pot, pretty small. But if he calls that, you're then betting 20 into a 120 pot, and if he calls that, you're betting 20 into a 160 pot. So those bet sizes tend not to be very good when considered in a pot size framework. But the funny thing is that even though this is a ridiculously simple strategy, and you guys are probably thinking this will never work, it kind of has an ability to throw opponents a little off guard, and it is really aggressive, and it is actually a very good way to begin working up an aggressive game in heads up. So what we're going to do now is quit the PowerPoint. I'm going to bring up some tables, and we're going to look at one or two examples of actually playing the Negreanu style. Let's do it. Okay, so now I've pulled up a game. This is a Stars Turbo $11.50 match. I know nothing about our opponent, and I'm going to try to pull off a big Negreanu strategy win on this guy. So I'm literally raising 100% before the flop when he hasn't prior raised, and I'm betting every single round of every single street. So, one thing is that also this strategy isn't 100% straightforward because your opponent isn't just going to fold or call to each of your bets, so you still have to make decisions when he decides to come in for a raise, and based on what he does, just like a normal heads-up match. Okay, so obviously I would normally come in and raise it to like 80 or 100. Here I'm going to min raise. The stage is set. He's thinking, what is this guy doing? I'm up against a total fish. Oh, my flop is set. I love to bet really big. Okay, we Negreanu it. He raises. Okay, now we can do whatever we want. He's raised us. So by the rules, we can do whatever we want. And since I'm out of position with a vulnerable made hand, I'm going to go ahead and 3-bet him. And I'm going to make it 225. And hope we can get it all in right now. If he calls, I'll push most turns. Or at least make a big pot committing bet. And I'm going to do that now. If I win this on the first hand, it'll be a little anticlimactic, but hey, that still works. I'll pocket 11 bucks. So this is a bet that's really pot committing, and he just folds. So the ace is kind of a scare card. It wasn't the best card for us, and maybe he had a draw or an 8 and just decided to discard it. Okay, now at this point we can again do whatever we want, but we're going to call. We're getting 3-1 with position. So we see a flop with a mid-suited queen. And mid-pair is often going to be best here. So you don't want to fold. You have two choices between raising and calling. And I'm going to go ahead and call to keep the pot small in position. Out of position I would raise because I'd be a lot more inclined to end it immediately. If he throws out a huge bet, I'm going to fold. Okay, I'm not going to call this based on his pre-flop 3-bet and the fact that he's betting the flop and the turn big. If he had made a smaller bet, I would have at least called, and if he had checked, I would have probably checked behind to play a small pot for the river. And now again, we can do whatever we want because he's raised. And with 2 high cards, you definitely don't want to fold. And you can certainly 3-bet. And I'm going to go ahead and call. And this is a pretty raggedy flop. Okay, only 5 cards have connected for him. And I'm going to come out with a bet of 75. If he raises me, I'm gone. Okay, it works out nicely. So anytime the flop comes paired, that means that only 5 cards this guy's holding, unless he has a pocket pair in the hole, have matched him, could possibly match him. So with our low suited connectors, we follow Negreanu. We're getting 2-1 pot odds. Now again, we can do whatever we want, and I'm going to call, getting 2-1 with a pretty disguised hand in position. This is a great flop for us with mid pair and a gut shot draw. Now normally I'd play this a little more cautiously, but I think this guy's played a very aggressive style, and I'm going to go ahead and raise them all in here. Okay, and he folds. So really, it's very unlikely he's got the 3-5 offsuit there for a straight. It's a very quick way to play a set, which is pretty unlikely. So if we're behind, it's usually going to be to an overpair, but this guy's been playing so aggressively that it's a lot more likely he's kind of doing it with air. 2 missed high cards. Okay, again Negreanu, and we would call a small raise with the gut shot draw, an overcard. Obviously we're folding for 300. So clearly a play we would not normally make without our very basic style. But let's see what happens here. So this is the good part when we can just be really easy. Okay, we've hit our wheel. We have to min bet again. And if he comes over top, the only hand that has this beat is 2-6, yeah, 2-6 or 6-7. And I think very likely we're going to be splitting here with split wheels, but I don't think he has the 2-6 or the 6-7. You can't, he might, but in heads up, you can't always worry about that, so I'm going to go ahead and call. And it is indeed a split, so that's what it's going to be the vast majority of the times, but sometimes you'll just be making a really dumb play with, say, a pair of jacks there, a pair of aces, and in those situations, we really can miss out on the value. Okay, we've made consecutive wheels, which I don't know if I've ever done before playing, but I don't object. And this is yet another time when the Negreanu strategy, I was going to say isn't working, but he raises. Now, what hands have us beat here? Only one. Only a 10 queen has us beat. Again, you can't worry about hands like that in heads up so much, so I'm going to go ahead and put them all in and hope he calls us with a 2-pair hand, like maybe Jack 5 or something. Okay. Well, that worked out nicely. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to pause this and pull up another table, and we'll try it again. Okay, here we are about 60 seconds later, and I'm up against another very unknown opponent, and we're going to again play the Negreanu strategy. So in the last one, we kind of lucked out in that we were hitting amazing cards, and our opponent was basically a total idiot. But you notice that there's still some effectiveness because we were very aggressive, and if we didn't necessarily cause him to make those very bad plays, certainly he was not responding well to our playing style, and it gave us the opportunity to really exploit some of his poor value bets and what I'll call purposeless bets, where he's not going to get a better hand to fold or a worse hand to call. So let's see how this guy responds. So maybe he'll be loose passive or something, and it's a whole different game depending on player strategy. And this guy folds to min raise, which is fine. You should generally do that with junk, but I think it's looking good for us because if the guy does have some capacity to fold to the early bets, namely pre-flop and flop, when we're betting something that he could reasonably fold to, then that obviously helps quite a bit. This looks good enough for min bet. Okay. So against the last guy who really didn't seem capable of folding, we didn't see the power of the Negreanu strategy to elicit folds, but you notice that even with small bets and raises, you can get guys to fold. And that holds even if you're not playing the Negreanu strategy and you just want to mix up your play a little, okay? I mean, normally you want to make bigger bets in relation to the pot, but playing a very small ball strategy isn't always so bad. We capture another monster hand. We can only min bet, and we still win a 200 chip pot though. So even though we're not able to maximize value, even putting in very small bets won us a nice pot. And kind of the moral there is you shouldn't slow play, only very rarely, because even if only small bets go in, they really add up. So when you bet small consistently, I'll definitely give this a fold. When you bet small consistently with a good hand, even if the bets aren't proper size, so to speak, then you still are working to build the pot. Okay, this is the first hand where the guy interrupts our Negreanu strategy, and I would fold to any normal raise, but getting 3-1, I'm going to call very wide. And I'm pretty much playing hit to win with these calls, which is something I will not do with the normal size raise, but I will do for min raise. And based on this weakness, I'm going to bluff this turn, and I'm going to give up now. So even though the bluff didn't work out, it's still a pretty decent play, because he's shown weakness, so a lot of the time it'll work, and when it doesn't, we've only risked another bet of about half the pot at the turn. So those are plays I make. It's a very common theme if you watch me play some of these heads-up matches, where if the guy shows some weakness at the flop, I'm going to bet the turn very wide. Okay, he again violates our game plan of min betting. We cover a lay with a 3-5, and since I was just exposed, kind of bluffing, our hand has literally no showdown value, but I'm not going to make a bluff. If I hadn't bluffed the last hand, I'd be more inclined to, and I think that's good because I think he would have called a bet of around half or 2/3 the pot there with this pair of nines. Now, another thing you've got to think about is image effects. So, this guy, even a pretty weak and inobservant player is going to notice when your pre-flop raise percentage is 100. Well, close to it. I mean, sometimes he raises beforehand and you don't always 3-bet then. But he's going to notice that you're in there betting and raising every hand. And you're probably going to get a little more action because of that. So even if you're not playing the Negreanu style, you should think whether you're playing in a way that's going to have pretty big image effects. And notice in this hand, we bet 20 into a pot of 160 and he folded. And in that case, he probably did not have the best hand, but normally that's a pretty big weakness. Okay, it's this is a concept that limit players know very well, but when the pot is, when you have trip fours, it's pretty sweet. Come on, buddy, raise me now. Okay, so now he raises, and this looks very standard to him. We've min bet like we always do, and I'm going to go ahead and 3-bet because it's kind of drawy, and I want him to respect my future min betting. So I want to build a pretty big pot. I'm going to make it 245, and hope to play for stacks. Okay, so again at this point we can do whatever we want because he's violated our rules. And I'm going to go ahead and throw out a big value bet here. And I'm going to bet 440, about 2/3 the pot. And I really think that there's a good chance he'll call here with a 7, a 9, anything like that. And if he's got a busted draw, obviously, or fold. So what does he have, a 7 or a 9 probably? I'm gonna look in the hand history to determine that. Okay. So in this last hand here, he indeed had 7 jack, so he flopped middle pair. Okay, fair enough. It's something you should always do. Take advantage of the fact that any hand that makes it to showdown, you can take a look at in the previous hand section. Returning to the point I was making earlier, it's a very big weakness if your opponent will readily fold to tiny river bets. Because think how easy that would be to exploit if you figured out he was doing that. You could just constantly make very small bets at the end, and that would show a very high profit if very small bluffs work with any kind of regularity, even a very small percentage of the time. So that's another awesome thing about playing Negreanu. One, you sometimes succeeding in that, but two, you realize, and he's pissed off now, do you have to play so slow? I guess because I'm babbling to you guys. Certainly I fold this one. But you realize that sometimes small bluffs are pretty successful, particularly if you have agreed that the guy is very likely to be on a misdraw. And you can go ahead and bet small and hope for the best. Now notice what's happened here. Obviously we're not going to call this, but he has become pretty pissed off. I'm guessing, I mean who knows what he had there, but most likely he's tilting a lot from our constant min raises and min bets, and he's beginning to play very fast. If the stacks were deeper, getting 2-1 in position, I would absolutely call, and now I'm going to fold though, because we're not very deep stacked, and my hand isn't quite strong enough. Even suited, I'd be a lot more inclined to play. But at this point, I'm going to be much more likely to give him action when he shoves over top with a play like this. So here, for instance, if I had a hand like 10 king even, I would probably give him a call, because this is the third or fourth time he's coming with a big overbet facing one of our little min raises. So I'm going to do it again this hand. If he shoves, I'm calling. Let's do it. Okay, so we're not a huge favorite. We're like 60-40. But that's pretty nice and heads up. So, come on. Yes, awesome. Okay. And the really nice thing that happened there was he began adjusting to our strategy, which is good. That's a mark of a good player, is adjusting to what your opponent is doing and not playing the same style regardless of what you're seeing. But a lot of times guys will not adjust well. So for instance there, our opponent realized that he could simply wait for us to make our tiny bets, and then he could raise, he could check raise, he could 3-bet us, but he began doing that too wide. So the king-jack suited wasn't so bad, although his risk-reward ratio was pretty poor. But based on the frequency he was doing that, it's very likely he was doing it with a lot more marginal hands as well, and we got a guy to misadjust to our strategy. Okay, I hope this video has given you guys something to think about. And I've had a blast making it. We're 2-0 with the Negreanu strategy, so a very happy Collin Moshman signing off.